Author of the MAGA Doctrine and president of Turning Point USA, here's Charlie Kirk.
Welcome back, everybody. Email us freedom@charliekirk.com. One of my favorite states in America is Minnesota. Love Minnesota. Great people. And I just don't think it gets the attention it deserves. It's a beast of a state. It's a huge state. It's one of the nation's largest states and has really made a phenomenal contribution, I should say, to America in more ways than one. Some of America's great companies were founded by Minnesotans, and it's just gone off the rails in recent years politically. Minnesota is very similar to other Midwest states where I believe it has been so just abused by corrupt politicians. Illinois is very similar. But I think that there's still a lot of opportunity and a lot of life left in Minnesota, the great state of Minnesota. And joining us now is someone who's trying to turn the great state of Minnesota around, Dr. Scott Jensen. You guys can check it out, drscottjensen.com, running for governor in the great state of Minnesota. Dr. Jensen, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Charlie. It's good to be with you.
Tell us about your campaign. You are 35 days out from Election Day. How are things going?
Things are going well. I think that we've used the same polling company that Glenn Youngkin had used, and I think we're even closer now than he was about a month away from the election, so we're very encouraged by that. The last two polls have shown us about 2.5 to 3 points down. We're within the margin of error. Real clear politics has come out and said it's a toss-up. Tim Walz is involved in one of the largest COVID relief program frauds in the entire country. $250 million gone. And the Tim Walz team can't tell us when he learned about the fraud. They don't know if it was in the spring of 2020, the summer, or November of 2020. And Minnesotans are getting tired of his strategy. He seems to be following Joe Biden's playbook. He's hiding in the basement, denying the opportunity for debates. Minnesota Public Radio came out yesterday and was disappointed, I think, or maybe perhaps it was Minnesota Public TV, but Tim Walz has said, no, he won't do a debate with me on their program either. So we think that the momentum's definitely shifted. It's coming our way, and we're excited.
So I love Minnesota. It's a very interesting state, and I think it has gone radically out, more left-wing than Minnesota values. It's very interesting, though. There has always been this kind of working class, Minnesota tradition, Democrat Farmer Labor Union, if I'm not mistaken, DFLs, which I think are spending a lot against you, if not mistaken, right? Even though, ironically, a lot of their kind of interests align. Talk about kind of the history of Minnesota politically. It was one of the only states to vote against Ronald Reagan, if I'm not mistaken, either 84 or in 80. At the same time, it's a very kind of conservative state in other ways. Talk about that.
Charlie, Minnesota's always had a strong work ethic. And I think that that's really been the thing that's kept us from being entirely a blue state. But you're right. In 1972, that was the last year that Minnesota voted for a Republican presidential candidate in Nixon. The DFL party, though, has lost the F and the L. The farmers are absolutely fed up.
Yes, that's exactly
with
right.
Heavy-handed, if you will, departments and agencies of Minnesota government. The MPCA has been out of bounds. The DNR has slipped at times, to be sure. The Met Council is responsible for the largest cost overrun of a project in probably the history of Minnesota, with a light rail project that's gone from $2 billion to nearly $3 billion. The labor is also leaving the Democratic Party because, frankly, the Democratic Party's heavy on promises, but short on, if you will, actually producing what they said they would do. And we're seeing the same thing, Charlie. And I heard earlier on your program with the Latino Hispanic community. They're fed up. They're saying, we're not buying what you're selling because you just come in every 4 years, make a bunch of promises, and then you're nowhere to be found. And frankly, your policies aren't helping us. People are furious with Tim Walz for hooking our wagon to the California car mandates. And in so doing, he's helped drive inflation higher in Minnesota in terms of our gas prices, our fuel, our oil prices, our groceries are 20% up. People are just saying, listen, Tim Walz might be hiding in the bunker. He might spend $12 million to demonize Scott Jensen as some sort of extreme character. But the fact of the matter is, Charlie, 6 years ago, I was Family Doctor of the Year in Minnesota. I'm not an extreme guy. I'm a family doctor who likes to solve problems. And I really think that governance in Minnesota is broken.
Yeah, no kidding. And there's some incredibly radical elements. It'd be one thing if the Democrat Party in Minnesota would kind of weigh both options and govern from the middle, but there's been some extraordinarily radical ideas that have been implemented, and just one that's so fundamental towards human flourishing, which is crime. You know, I've visited Minneapolis my entire life. I have family from Minnesota. I have family that are the biggest Minnesota Viking fans, I think, ever. And we always have fun with that because they just don't win very often. Sorry, no offense. It's just the way it is. But when I visit now, and I just mean this from a loving kind of posture, Minneapolis is not the city it used to be. It's full of crime. It's more depressed than I've ever seen. And I know a lot of people that are moving out of the Minneapolis metropolitan area because of that. Can you talk about the rise in crime and what really what triggered that?
Tim Walz arguably is the godfather of lawlessness that's crept across Minnesota, but it's also, if you will, poisoned our nation. Tim Walz in 2020 during the riots was more concerned about making certain that Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Maxine Waters were happy with his performance. He was more concerned about the hard left base. He didn't put the National Guard on the streets. And when he finally did, after 3 days, he called on a bunch of 19-year-old cooks. He tried to blame the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey. But if you actually look back, Charlie, at Tim Walz's history, in 2005, he quit on the National Guard. He had been promoted to the highest rank that you could get as an enlisted officer. He was the command sergeant major, and he was supposed to go with his battalion. But when they found out they were getting deployed to Iraq, Walz quit. 15 years later, when it comes time to letting the National Guard restore lawful behavior in Minnesota, Tim Walz quit on him again. 3 days later, on May 28th, when Tim Walz made the decision to stand down and let the 3rd Precinct building burn and absolutely surrendered to the rioters, he quit on the cops. He has done this over and over again. And what we're seeing now is the downstream problems where we're seeing women in Minneapolis, St. Paul targeted, rape, robbery, carjacking. We didn't even used to keep track of carjacking, but I think in 2021, we had almost 800 carjackings. And many of these are women being targeted as they're coming out of a daycare center or a grocery store. People are literally having to decide how far back they want to come to a stop before a stoplight so that they have a little room to wiggle if all of a sudden someone's coming at them in terms of a carjacking attempt. Minnesota has fundamentally changed, and this is because the godfather of crime is Tim Walz, and he has been slow to act. And every time he's called on the lead, he quits. It's almost as if he's lazy. He's not doing his homework. He should have, with this $250 million fraud in terms of feeding our children, he should have gotten on it once he saw that there was a problem. But he let hundreds of millions of dollars continue to be paid to these fraudsters. And now he's trying to blame the judge. He's trying to blame the FBI. He's trying to blame the Department of Agriculture. And Minnesotans are getting tired of it.
And for those of you listening in the national audience that might say, oh, I don't know if a Republican can win in Minnesota, play cut 56.
My sleeper is actually Minnesota governor's race. I think given the way that state has moved over the last couple of cycles, and you've got Tim Walz there, the incumbent Democrat, running against Scott Jensen, who's a doctor, Republican. That race is one to keep an eye on because you'll see if Republicans turn out on election day, that could very well be an upset. So keep an eye on that one.
So there you have it. That's Tom Bevan from Real Clear Politics. A Republican can win. I remember Tim Pawlenty. That was a little while ago, but Republicans can win statewide. It's happened before.
Charlie, we've set all records for raising funds for Republican gubernatorial candidates. By the time it's all said and done, we'll have raised over $5 million. We've got 110,000 people that have joined our email team. We've got thousands of people door knocking and phone banking for us every weekend. We have over 35,000 unique donations come our way. There's an energy, there's an excitement in Minnesota, and there's a recognition that our Constitution that calls for a government that's devoted to the security and the benefit and the protection of its people has got to be restored. And I think that's why we're going to win, and we're very excited.
Well, it seems as if it's kind of the final push. Talk about your website and how people can support you, Doctor.
DrScottJensen.com, DrScottJensen.com. And I think one of the things that's separated us from Tim Walz is we've put out 10-point programs for the last 4 months. We're trying to combat inflation, energy, public safety, education. And we've even gone so far as to say, listen, we want people to be physically fit themselves. So we put out a 10-point program with Matt Burke, my lieutenant governor candidate. He had to go to Baltimore to get a Super Bowl ring, but we forgave him for that. But the bottom line is we're trying to help people take charge of their own health and recognize that there are things they can do when we're in the midst of a pandemic as well. They can lose 5 pounds, walk every day for 15, 20 minutes. And we put out a 10-point program to help people get motivated. And to all of this, Tim Walz has been crickets. There's nothing coming forward. Now he won't debate us. Typically we've had half a dozen debates each election cycle. Tim Walz and I have had one debate, and he said he'd allow one more, but no live audience, and he doesn't want it to be in a Minneapolis-St. Paul TV market.
This is such an important thing, and as we close our conversation, this is not the only state this is happening, though. I can point to at least 5 or 6 gubernatorial races across the country, Arizona with Kerry Lake being one of them, where the Democrat just doesn't want to debate. It's their new thing. They're going to just hide under this barrage of money. And John Fetterman in Pennsylvania refuses to debate till late October. That's so unhealthy for our country, isn't it, Doctor? 30 seconds. I mean, you can say what you want about Republicans or conservatives or whatever, but if you're not going to have a conversation, you shouldn't be in office.
What they're telling voters is, we really don't need you. We're just going to rely on the machine, the money, and the media, and they're going to get us across the goal line. But what they don't have this time around, Charlie, is the movement. I think a lot of people recognize there's a moment right now, and in that moment, what we're doing is we're telling people, the millennials and the Gen Zs, the minorities, the moms and the dads, the mama bears, they're rising up. And they're going to do exactly in Minnesota and in Arizona what they did in Virginia in 2021.
Yeah,
we're going to win.
Yeah, I think you're a problem solver that can really help fix the great state of Minnesota. I really do. I love that state. There's phenomenal people. Thank you for running. It's not easy. There's a lot of ads being run against you. And please run and win and clean up that great state. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Charlie.
I love to see regular people run for office. It's just, he was against lockdowns early too, by the way. Very, very important.